The voice of Husker Nation is on the air. This is Hail Varsity Radio. Insight, opinion, expertise, along with the biggest names talking Nebraska sports. Join in with the show at 402-489-1240 or 1-800-825-5865. Now, here are your hosts, Chris Schmidt and Elijah Herbel.
Welcome to it, midweek editions here. It's Hail Varsity Radio. Chris Schmidt, Elijah Herbel. We're powered by Hurrdat Sports and loaded up as we get closer to, well, kind of a throwback weekend. What I mean by throwback, you have two offenses, two defenses, and two teams with N on their helmet that are going to fight, scratch, claw your eyes out and maybe each other's. 489-1240, 489-1240 to get in, and can find us on the YouTube channel with Hail Varsity. Subscribe to that Hail Varsity YouTube channel. Easy to watch the show. Hail Varsity Twitter at HVarsity Radio. And if you're hearing us across the state on the Hail Varsity Radio Network, 1-800-825-5865. Can email the show, Chris at hailvarsity.com. Mike Babcock with us in about 15 minutes. We'll check in with Babbers. We'll spend some time in hour two. Our favorite Husker offensive lineman, Jeremiah Sirles, will kick off hour two. Evan Bland joins us at a Jock Doc with Dr. Brandon Seifert. Elijah, what's shaking? You had a bowling outing last night. I pray that the team rallied and found a way. I'm not quite for certain on that. I'm still squeezing in some days to grill. I got some kebabs from Mama last night. I had a pork steak. It was glorious. And away we go. We're here. We're ready to go on Wednesday.
Well, let me take a quick moment here to talk about bowling last night.
You gonna take a knee?
I'm quite disappointed. No. If I take a knee, that means I'm ready to die, and I'm not ready to die. Shout out Matt Rhule for that quote. Do
you ever take a knee while you're making your way up to the line, so you don't go over the line and let it? You kind of the old grandma free throw that Rick Barry used to do. Do you ever just roll it with both hands forward?
No.
I'm insulting you.
You are insulting me a little bit. Like, take a knee so you don't step over the line. No, I'm not an amateur. Thank you very much. I don't step over the line. It's not hard.
Next week on ABC, Elijah Herbel, the Pro Bowling Tour.
No, I am an amateur, though. Unfortunately, though, we have dropped to second place in our bowling league. We had one off week, and we got.
You need some motivation.
No. And the thing was last night was the matchup of the season. Simply put. We were going up against the team that had leapfrogged us into first place.
Was his name DeJesus?
No, this is the I don't know if I should shout them out. The Fairway Flyers. I'm not going to mention the names, but I was really looking forward to bowling against them last night, and we show up and they called in that they were going to be absent last night, and they're going to make up their bowling for the night at a later date. So it's still up in the air whether or not we beat them on points last night or not. We're not going to know probably until we show up to bowling next week. They're just going to have to show up at some point in their convenience and make that game up, and we'll see. Our scores are in the book now. They're going to go get their scores in, and the computer will tabulate the results. So we don't know. We don't know how last night went in bowling. We're going to find out, though. And it's kind of how it is with Husker football on Saturday, right? Coming off a bye week, we're going to find out, right?
No, that's kind of where it's at, and the excitement level's not quite to Michigan week, but it's subdued. I get it, and you want to get to November, but there's still work to do these last 2 weeks of October with Northwestern and then Purdue. You think the coast is clear for Nebraska to get over 500? Easier said than done against Northwestern. The line has dropped by a point. It's now at 11.5, and I don't know if that means that things are looking up for Northwestern's quarterback, Ben Bryant, the Cincinnati transfer, or what. But it's just going to be funny to see what Northwestern team you get, because they're not at full strength, and they looked, well, fortunate to win last Saturday. They've had some moments, and they're going to come in and make sure Nebraska's got they're focused. Now, I watched the full episode this morning of Coach Rhule and the GB Rewind, and it was pretty cool behind the scenes. And what you're noticing with this football team, not only the win at Illinois, not only the bye week, but the day-to-day work that this team puts in, the focus that they put in, the attention to detail they put in, all reasons that you've lost in the past, because Nebraska's not been out-talented that often on the field, or there's been at least equal talent. They've not been blown out of the water talent-wise, with the exception of when you're facing and seeing a Penn State or an Ohio State or a Michigan, and some years Michigan State. But at least in the West, you've not been out-talented. You've just been out-developed. And that is something very personal to Matt Rhule. He's a developer, and you're seeing teams and players get better and better and better with this 2023 squad. I think it's going to be fascinating to see the young pups that have had a year of in-season development get a chance to play their Final Four and not burn a red shirt. I'm fascinated to see what some of these guys that have burnt their red shirt get to do now that the time is now for that wide receiving core. And we'll dive into signs of progress here for Nebraska, because it's going to be on display. It'll absolutely be on display. Did they pull the old Nebraska trick where they kind of put their feet up, hey, they've won a game, ooh, and just kind of coast and don't respect the game or the opponent? Or do they stay locked in and hungry? And just the way this team is led right now, and it's led by the coaches, there's not going to be any foot off the gas. It doesn't mean Northwestern can't come out and play well. It doesn't mean Nebraska can't continue to self-inflict on themselves. But from a focus standpoint and a respect for the game part of things, I mean, Nebraska is going to be dialed in because in this episode, Rhule said the leash is off. Well, he still has his hand on the leash. It may be off, but it can go back on. And I think Monday through Thursday, the leash is on with this head football coach and his assistants. And that needs to happen. That needs to absolutely happen. So we'll dive into some of that. We'll get caught up with Mike Babcock, his time on Big Red Wrap-Up last night. But we have a chance to see Nebraska really continue to take some steps forward. This game, this team, has always been a roadblock or a detour on what a season was supposed to be. Nebraska is good enough to win 10 or 11 ball games. Here's Northwestern to ruin it. Here's Nebraska trying to get to a bowl game. Here's Northwestern to ruin it. Nebraska's trying to get a consecutive win streak together. Here's Northwestern to ruin it.
Oh, here's Nebraska trying to get their season started off in the right way in Dublin, a game you're winning. Here's Northwestern to ruin it.
You're up 11 twice. They fight, and I think you can appreciate that about Northwestern.
Well, and that's the concern right now is with that fight and with their tendency to ruin some Husker seasons. It feels like Nebraska's got a chance to build some momentum right now. You get a win going into the bye week. You have some winnable games, quote unquote, in front of you.
Can we say that anymore?
I hate saying that, but let's be clear. Like I've laid it out a couple of times on this show. Northwestern, yeah, they fight, but Nebraska's got the talent advantage, and they got a head coach in place right now in Northwestern that I don't think is going to be their head coach next year in Coach Braun. I don't think that's a long-term appointment. So you have a team in Northwestern that realistically, if you are in fact Nebraska and building in the direction that you think you're building right now, you should win this football game. You have Michigan State in a couple weeks. That's a program that's spiraling, as evidenced by their loss to Rutgers. And Purdue is in the midst of a kind of a culture change from Braum to Walters, which Nebraska's in the midst of a culture change too. But I think you have the talent advantage on Purdue. You have some games in front of you that 2-1 should be attainable, and 3-0 should be something that can be there if Nebraska goes out and executes football games. And you have a chance to build momentum, but wouldn't it be just a Northwestern move to go and ruin that momentum coming off the bye week and derail that?
It'd be a Northwestern move, and it would be a total Nebraska move to go out there and just look like hot garbage, to quote Coach Prime, because you're just disinterested. And you know, is the week of practice going to be good leading up to this? There's just a different mood and feel where they're not always pretty, they're not always perfect, But I think the effort or the interest is been pretty consistent, and you need that against Northwestern, because Nebraska's just had moments where they've gone out there and not put Northwestern away or not put Northwestern down, and that is a lesson learned. You flip on the Minnesota film where they're up 31-10, and that's a game you absolutely want back against Minnesota. You see Northwestern never say die in a crowd of 100, okay, because that's how many folks were at Ryan Field. And you may get a wounded Northwestern team. I mean, it's going to be key for them to see what they get with their quarterback or their backup quarterback. Kurtz is a guy that's good. If Ben Bryant plays, and maybe he does, guy's super talented. You also had Northwestern give it to Penn State for about a half of football. They're up 10-3. Penn State had a sip of James Franklin's coffee and then scored 17 straight and 35 of the next 38 points. And if you're Nebraska defensively, I mean, Penn State had 7 sacks. I'm not saying Nebraska's front is Penn State, no, but Nebraska's front is pretty darn good, and you could have some advantage there. But it all kind of comes down to what is Nebraska's focus and interest level like, and I think this staff will have them ready to go. I mean, I have thought that many times over many years, every time Nebraska's gone up to Chicago or Northwestern's come to Lincoln. And I'm not sure what Northwestern team I get. I'm becoming more sure with what Nebraska football team I'm going to get, and that's going to be a team that'll play well defensively, and then you'll maybe see a little bit more progress offensively. They've been good to the tune of 200 yards a game on the ground. That's going to win you some football games. You've got an identity with your quarterback, and this is a game where you got to be safe, but you still got to break in some of the young wideouts. Give me 18 targets to Fedoni on Saturday, and give me some checkdowns to the running back. Let me see some more of Fleeks. And, one constant has been that offensive line. Everywhere else, you've been beat to hell on offense. You've been able to run out the same 5 guys who keep trying to do their best on that offensive line. Maybe this is a game they go eat, because quite honestly, you had the lines of scrimmage. That's how you're going to win ball games if you're Nebraska. You flip it around. If I'm anyone on that defense that's still around from last year, where they went 95 Nebraska on you in Dublin, I'm remembering that, right? I don't need Rhule to go off before kickoff with this motivational speech, and I'd pay to hear him. He's that good. If I'm anyone that's a holdover and I got it slammed in my face to the tune of several hundred yards and 7-minute drives where they just bludgeoned you, and there's still photos of, oh, wow, they could run a train through that hole, because they could. They ran it, Hole, the running back, they ran it all over you last year. They smoked you. They physically dominated you. If I'm any member of that Nebraska football team from last year that's still here, I've circled this thing for a while to get not just get mad, but get even. So we'll dive in as the show progresses here with signs of progress. But just showing up and being locked in, Elijah, that's 1A, B, C, and D for me, because it's never happened on a consistent basis against Northwestern.
And yeah, that's like the two sides to this coin is, on one hand, it's Northwestern, but on the other hand, it's Northwestern. That's kind of like the two places I go. Where on one hand, yeah, it's Northwestern football. They're in a year of kind of turmoil right now, and they're playing like their backs are up against a wall. But at the same time, like, you have the advantage on them from a talent perspective and the momentum of your season, but also Northwestern has stung you plenty of times, and that's why it's so tough to try and predict this game for me. But when I look at the opportunity, and I don't want to get ahead of myself here and talk about signs of progress, but I think I'm going to do it here. Nebraska's got the opportunity here when you look about the grand rebuild as a whole. Like, Nebraska under Scott Frost, especially 2021, they were losing pretty. man, their offense looks great. It's a whole bunch of one-score losses. They're playing great against these top 25 teams. They were losing pretty. You've made it into this part of the season. All 3 of Nebraska's first 3 wins have been ugly wins. I think you have learned to a point how to win ugly. I don't think that there's ever going to be a point this year where you win pretty. Maybe that's down the road, but I think the next sign of progress is, can you control a game from start to finish? And I think you have an opportunity on Saturday with an opponent that can be controlled from start to finish. And I know they gave Penn State a scare for a half, and they came back against Minnesota after being down. So I'm not saying this team isn't dangerous, but I think you have the opportunity in front of you to control a game for all 4 quarters. And I'm not saying it's going to look pretty. I think that's somewhere down the road. But the next step in this is, can you control a team for 4 quarters? And Northwestern feels like a great opportunity with what they have on the lines of scrimmage and what you have with your running defense. Maybe Northwestern trots out the backup quarterback. You have a chance to get him flustered. You have a chance to continue finding your offensive identity with Heinrich Harburg at the quarterback position. I think the next step in the evolution of this Husker football program is controlling a game from start to finish, and you have that opportunity on Saturday. And if we're talking about progress in this 2023 season and getting better on a week-by-week basis, that's what I need to see on Saturday, is a team that is controlled from start to finish, because Nebraska was close to doing that against Illinois, but it felt hairy in the second half.
Sure. Just
a game where it doesn't feel hairy in the second half. It always feels like Nebraska's in control.
Northwestern is that Twitter video that's been out all week where there's a kangaroo trying to drown your dog out in a lake. Mike Babcock joins us next.
And now, back to Hail Varsity Radio.
Back with you, it's Hail Varsity Radio. Chris Schmidt, Elijah Herbel. We're powered by Hurrdat Sports. Mike Babcock with us from Hail Varsity. Can get that bi-weekly newsletter from Mike. Just get an email sent. Request it at MikeB@HurrdatSports.com. Babbers, it is Northwestern week. Do you have your Hail Mary gloves on?
Take nothing for granted.
That is about right. Man. And fair to say that the Purple Cats have been taken for granted for far too long by the folks in Big Red?
Yeah, that's probably right. I mean, you can understand why that's been the case, but yeah, you can't do that this season. And, Coach Rhule has said go 1-0 and improve. That's what you do each week. I think you need to take that advice going into this game, although we can look beyond it, certainly, because we're not locked into that.
We're not, and I want to kind of get your take on your reaction to Rhule and his motivation, more so through some of the video clips that are out, the social media clips. And have you seen a coach motivate like him in a while? I mean, he's got a gift for it.
Yeah, I think he does. And as we've said before, he uses what he says in news conferences also to motivate his players. I'm impressed with what he does. I've said this before, but he's very engaging. He seems to be very open with the media. He answers questions that you have before you even ask him, particularly related to injury situations. And he doesn't back away from any question, although he'll say if he prefers not to elaborate on something, he'll say that as well. But it's been a while since we've had anybody that's been quite that open, I think. He's won me over at this point from the standpoint of I think they're going in the right direction.
It's Mike Babcock with us here on Hail Varsity Radio. And Mike, whenever you talk about that open and honest nature, I'm not sure if you saw this today on Twitter, but Evan Cooper took to Twitter. It was freshman defensive back Sincere Safiula who got on Twitter and said 2 things define you: your patience when you have nothing and your attitude when you have everything. Well, Evan Cooper hopped on Twitter and said, just show up to lift and meetings on time. That's about as open and honest as you can get in a public forum for what Sincere needs to do to be able to move his way up the depth chart and get himself on the field and I guess reach a point where you have everything. And I want to get your reaction. I'm not sure if you saw that, but what's your reaction to a Husker position coach getting on Twitter and just airing it out publicly? This is what you got to do if you want to get on the field, instead of getting on Twitter and saying, I shouldn't say complaining because it wasn't a complaining post, but just essentially saying, hey, you want to get on the field, you want to have everything, here's how you do it. You're not living up to the standard right now. Don't
get on Twitter and air the laundry and then be shocked if there's a response to, that's where the laundry is hanging, Mike.
Yeah. I didn't see it, but I would be inclined to say, let's keep it off social media. And I think that's what Matt Rhule would say, right? Because he says he shuts that stuff down. He doesn't pay attention to it. I think that he would have that same expectation for his players and for his assistant coaches.
Very fair. Mike Babcock with us from Hail Varsity at MD Babs on Twitter is where you find him. Babbers, you had a chance to sit down at Big Red Wrap-Up last night and your thoughts. I know a lot was talked about with Memorial Stadium.
Yeah, I tend to ramble, that's for sure. And
I call it educate.
No truth to the observation that I was there for that first game against Oklahoma when they wore the blue jerseys. But, one thing I didn't say, I think it's kind of interesting to me. My uncle was the equipment manager at Nebraska for football and baseball from 65 to 77. He had been a farmer in the North Loop, Scotia area for years. And so he had this eye for things. And before they put down artificial turf, and I don't remember which direction it was, but he said, I think the field is slightly uphill one direction or the other, north to south. When they put the artificial turf down on the field, they prepared the field to put it there. They found out that it was definitely slightly elevated going one direction or the other. So technically, it wasn't dramatic, but technically you could have been going uphill before they put that turf down, or you could have been going downhill depending upon which direction you were going. I always thought that was an interesting thing in Memorial Stadium. This former farmer has got an eye for fields, and he says, hey, that field is not exactly level, and it wasn't.
Hey, I can confirm, my time with Husker Vision, you couldn't trust the levels on the camera to match up with the field and find your level. You'd have to go line up with the field because there was a slight difference between what was level with the press box and what's level on the field. I'm not sure if that means the press box is also at a slight tilt or what's up with that, but there is some slight, just very slight inconsistencies at the One Memorial Drive, and maybe that's because of 100 years Memorial Stadium, things settle and whatnot, but it is slightly off kilter. Just my personal experience as well.
Well, I look at the old turf monster. The sack I remember for the rest of my life was Cale Gundy getting taken down by the big red end at midfield because of the crown. And you're standing on one sideline looking across the other, and it's like half the bodies disappear.
Yeah, you get that turf on there, and you got a little bit of a crest there. And the other thing I didn't say, this is me, I was a sophomore at the university, 1966, in the fall of 66. I helped my uncle put stripes on the helmets.
Did you really?
So you'll know. Because 65, they just had the numbers on the helmets, and in 66, they then had the stripes. So I get credit for helping with that.
I love that. Mike Babcock's with us. Mike, if we had to draft a team you're somewhat confident in the Big Ten West to get to Indy, who's that team right now?
Well, fortunately, there's nobody in the room, so I can say it probably without something being thrown at me, but probably Iowa, because I just think that Iowa scraps, and, you can say what you want about a horrible offense, but they get the job done. I would say the Hawkeyes are that team, but who knows what's going to happen on Black Friday when Nebraska plays Iowa and Lincoln. It depends a lot on, like I said earlier, we can talk about things ahead. We're not like the coaches. We don't have to go 1-0 and try to improve each week. We can look down the line. If Nebraska could get something going, have an opportunity. You beat Northwestern. You build a little momentum and confidence, and you play with that grit. You could beat Purdue, right? I mean, there's an opportunity to beat Purdue. If you beat Purdue, there's momentum that you could build at that point. I just think there is enough there for Nebraska. If you play gritty and accept that that's the way you need to play to get the job done, who's to say what's going to happen? Now, I'm not going to say that Nebraska is going to win the West Division, but my pick of Iowa could be susceptible to Iowa might not get past Nebraska, at the end of the year, and maybe it's Wisconsin that has an opportunity, or maybe Wisconsin doesn't get past Nebraska. It's hard to say what's going to happen, but the potential is there. Nebraska can be competitive in these remaining 6 games, in my opinion.
Mike, as we were leaving the Michigan weekend, I think a lot of people in Husker Nation, myself included, kind of felt that Nebraska needed to be at 6 wins before that Maryland game if they wanted to make a bowl game. It was going to get hairy after that. If you weren't at 6, you still had a chance. But has that changed for you at all in the past 2 weeks, seeing what Nebraska did against Illinois, seeing Maryland fall to Illinois, seeing the Iowa and Wisconsin matchup? Maybe Wisconsin isn't as good as some people thought. That game was just ugly all around. Has that changed for you in the past 2 weeks now that, if Nebraska's at 5 with Maryland coming to town, you might feel a little better?
Yeah, it has changed for me. And that Illinois beat Maryland was a shocker to me. There's no way I thought that was going to happen. So yeah, that kind of changes the dynamic. To my way of thinking, is that Maryland becomes susceptible. Michigan State is in everything is in an uproar there because of what's happened with the head coach. It's just the schedule has changed as time goes on, so that I probably would have said, if nothing had changed at Michigan State, going to East Lansing, probably not something that you're going to be in a position where you could win that game. But I think now you could win that game. You could have 6 before you play Maryland. But now Maryland loses to Illinois. What do we say there? Northwestern beats Minnesota. How does that change the way I see Northwestern? It seems like week to week things change for me.
Absolutely, it is week to week with this league in the western half. Mike, I think it's a real danger zone for Wisconsin. They got beat up. They're with backup quarterback. They're not great at running the football. They're trying to transition on offense, waiting for Joe Daly to run out there with what they're doing with their offensive overhaul. Now they got to go to Illinois. They got to go to Illinois after getting put out like a smoky treat by Iowa defensively. And Illinois suddenly has some confidence and is hot. I mean, Wisconsin could be in some trouble.
Yeah, it's the same thing. I mean, again, you look at those final 6 games on Nebraska's schedule, and it's a little bit of a, not uproar, that's probably not the word, but there's a little bit of a mess up here with these programs that if I looked at it at the beginning of the season, I would say it's a dramatically different kind of a stretch than it was when I look at it now. I mean, and Wisconsin is in that mix as well. So again, the players have to take what Rhule says, one game at a time. You can't look beyond that. And you guys talked about it earlier. You can't look beyond Northwestern. There's no way. You don't know what's going to happen, what Northwestern team you're gonna see that comes to Lincoln. But you play that kind of gritty defense that Nebraska has shown it can play, and you cut down on the turnovers on offense so that you're not constantly putting the defense right back out there, and you have some kind of a running game, I think you have a chance.
Mike Babcock with Hail Varsity. Mike B at HurrdatSports.com. Babbers, we'll talk next time. Thanks for the time.
Thanks for having me, guys.
And now, back to Hail Varsity Radio.
Back with you, it's Hail Varsity. We're presented by your friends at Hurrdat Sports. Chris Schmidt, Elijah Herbel. Big thanks to Mike Babcock, Jeremiah Sirles. In 15 minutes, we've got to go to the stream. We'll get to more questions. Elijah saw what you saw, Elijah, the Evan Cooper tweet And that was pretty interesting. Ty is back in town. He's going to be in Lincoln/Omaha for work the next couple of weeks. So he's asking for some good dinner spots. Well, if you're in Omaha, get to La Vista, the Hurrdat Sports Bar and Grill. Get there, get the Bang Bang sauce, get a cold pint. You'll be smiling. Get your friends at Lazari's dialed up. Seth and Gregor's in Lincoln if you need some pizza. And Chris at HaleVarsity.com is where you can email. And also Elijah at Hurrdat Sports is where you can email if you want some Chop House recommendations. Fair?
Fair.
Yeah.
I think you and I are both great resources. I'd also encourage, if you're on social media, DM me on Twitter. My DMs are open. I will see your DMs to me, regardless if you follow me or if I follow you back.
At Herbal Essence.
I will see your DMs. You can give me a DM there, and I'll give you some other recommendations as well. There's so many great food spots in Lincoln and Omaha, and I think Schmidt and I have tried all of them.
We will. Yeah, and if we haven't, we will. We've had the Chinese food discussion that's been pretty glorious. We've dove into, there's a couple of barbecue spots that I have been told to go hit. I have not. And from a taco standpoint, I got to find, I have a go-to Tuesday taco spot, but I want another option as far as just a place to go get killer tacos. It could be a food truck for all I care, but just a place that I can do tacos that it's not your normal hard shell or soft shell. There's a little oomph to the shell.
Oomph to the shell?
Yeah. My favorite taco shell, and we had these out in western Nebraska, Uncle Willie. They're barge tacos, where you would put your corn or flour tortilla on a pan that had a little oil in it.
Yeah.
And then they were oil.
Oh, they pop up, yeah.
They pop up.
Yep.
And they were just crunchy and incredible.
Were they homemade tortillas?
They weren't homemade tortillas.
See, I've heard
it's homemade, like stuff out of the garden. That's pepper, onion, you know how.
Well, that's always the key.
It is.
I have heard homemade tortillas not that difficult, and I've heard if you like making bacon at home, that bacon grease is the best fat that you can use to make your tortillas
Note
ever.
to self.
So I've been meaning to try that for a while now. I actually made mayonnaise with bacon grease. I'm not sure if you've ever homemade
Never
mayonnaise.
made my own mayonnaise.
Really easy. Look it up online. If you've never made your own mayonnaise, if you're a mayonnaise fan, which I think most people in Nebraska most likely are, mayonnaise is fantastic. Look up a recipe online for making your own mayonnaise. It's fantastic. It's easy. If you have an immersion blender or just even a stand blender, you can get it done in like 60 seconds, and it's so much better than what you can get in the store. So much better. Highly recommend trying that. I want to try making my own tortillas, but yeah, no. You've gotten us off on a food tangent now.
I did, but I had to answer Ty's question in the stream. Ken asks and answers, I should say, the question we asked to Babbers. Who you betting on for the West? Your confidence rating. Ken is saying Iowa's the front runner. Totally agree with that. And good chance Nebraska and Iowa play for the West title.
Well, that would be
incredible. That would be incredible if that were a real thing.
If Nebraska wants to play for the West title against Iowa, though, they have to win out. Exactly. And the way I see it right now, in terms of your West frontrunners, I got Iowa at 1. I still have Wisconsin at 2. And then I probably have Nebraska at 3. That's probably how I'm looking at it right now. And that's probably going to change by the end of October. Almost no doubt in my mind that's going to change by the end of October based on how Nebraska plays, and we'll see how Wisconsin responds to that Iowa game. But Iowa's your front runner, and I think there's a pretty good gap between Iowa and the next 2 or 3.
Let's talk about your nerves. How do you calm nerves? Some of you have nicotine gum. Some of you have nicotine. Some of you are rum and Coke fans. I'm not judging. I'm just saying there's all sorts of options to help.
Some people read a good book, Schmitty.
You can do that. Some people pour a whiskey. But how do you keep your hands from jittering when it comes to your Nebraska football team? On the schedule, who has you most nervous? And we're going to take Nebraska off of that schedule. You can't tell me, even though it's probably not far off, that Nebraska is the team that makes you most nervous about Nebraska.
Oh, okay. I see what you're saying now.
Right? I mean, the old self-harm trick. Well, is Northwestern in that conversation for you? History is history. This year's a whole different ballgame. Maryland's up there. Sparty's there. Iowa. From a sure, man, they're going to be tough to beat. Iowa still is at the top of the food chain for me from a talent standpoint and skill. If you're not on your P's and Q's defensively, Maryland's a sound argument. On the road at Sparty, maybe they decide to take out this year of frustration on somebody. They will if it gets going sideways on you. So East Lansing's not easy. Purdue has had your number. And then there's Northwestern. I don't have, God, I'm going to be kicking myself about 6 o'clock Saturday probably, but I don't have the nervous meter really beyond a 5 for Saturday for Nebraska. I think they're still within that moment post-bye of really being locked in. I don't think they've gotten full of themselves. I don't think their head coach is going to let them get full of themselves. And I think they can go out and grind out another win and maybe have a little bit of breathing room. Purdue, can they follow it up? I mean, Purdue's going to have a bye to get ready for Nebraska, so that's not great. But they're not what they were under Braum, and he was an X factor. Okay.
Yep. But don't let Purdue's 2-5 record fool you. Whenever I look at that Purdue game, because their losses, you have a bad one. It's game 1 of the Walters era, so I think similar to that Minnesota game for Nebraska fans, you look back at that and go, well, I don't think that's the story of the season. I think you can say the same for Purdue's game 1 loss to Fresno State, but they kicked the hell out of Illinois. They went and beat them 44-19. Mm-hmm. A close loss to Iowa. They put up 14 points on Iowa, which is impressive in its own right to go put up 14 points in that Iowa defense, and you only lose by 6. Ohio State's going to beat a lot of people bad this year. They beat Purdue bad this year, but Purdue's had a tough schedule, and they're going to be coming off of a bye week whenever they play Nebraska. So you get an extra week of preparation for Nebraska. You get an extra week of prep. I think Purdue, to me, is a game that is most worrisome because I think a lot of people are going to be overlooking that game. Maybe not the fans, maybe not the team, but I think among the fan base, I think you're already, if you take down Northwestern, I think you're looking ahead, man, road trip to Sparty, that's a little worrisome. And then you get the November slate. I think people might be overlooking how tough of a test that Purdue game might be. That
Walters is really, really good.
Yep, and his defense, they come to play. Like, they're physical. They're not as talented as Purdue has been in the past, but that's a physical football team. Purdue scares me a little bit, but the game that scares me most in terms of like watching it and wanting to gouge your eyes out is going to be that Iowa game. And I know it's a long ways off, but that Iowa defense is legit. It's 100% for real. Nebraska's offense is not legit as of right now. And then you turn it around. Iowa loves running the football. Nebraska loves stopping the run. That game might make you want to gouge your eyes out. But that's not the game I'm most nervous about.
It'll be all right. No, my nervous level's probably it's Iowa, just because of what the stakes could be. Then it's Maryland from a talent standpoint, and I don't know where it's incomplete for me with Wisconsin. If Wisconsin doesn't get it done this weekend on the road, they're in real danger. How many plates of biscuits and gravy does Iowa's quarterback crush Sunday morning? That's what I want to know. We'll answer some more questions in the stream. We'll wind down hour 1. Sirles on the way with hour 2.
And now, back to Hail Varsity Radio.
One final time this hour, busy hour 2. Jeremiah Sirles, Husker standout NFL, are going to be with us to kick off hour 2. Evan Bland from the Omaha World Herald, a Jock Doc on Mr. Fields and his thumb. A reminder to get buckled up using your seatbelt. It saves lives, prevents injuries only if properly worn. Buckle up, a message from the Nebraska Department of Highway Safety Office. We were talking about what games are left on the schedule that make you the most nervous, and you can pick one or all of them, or maybe you feel a little bit better. I feel better about Saturday based on how Nebraska's responded with their mentality and presuming that they're going to keep getting better. I said that before August got here. I said that in August. I said that before kickoff in September. Matt Rhule teams get better. They get better on the field, and that is something that you've not seen from a Nebraska football season in a while. Anonymous chimes in, Illinois could still win 6 or 7 games. Let that sink in. They go get Wisconsin. They're right there. They're back at 4-4. Nate chimes in, first time in the chat. Where can I find these low-priced football tickets you were talking about? And Elijah, you were on a couple of different fan seat sites, and that's where you're looking, right?
Yeah, no free shoutouts here, but if you Google Nebraska Northwestern tickets, just Google that. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's a couple different options in terms of Vivid Seats, SeatGeek. Mm-hmm. Go find where you can find the cheapest seats. I'm sure you can find some. I just pulled it up, actually, after seeing this on the same site that I saw yesterday, verified through the university, Section 35, Row 64, $16 each. You would have to pay fees after that, so it'd probably come out to somewhere around $25 or $30 each once you pay for the fees and whatnot. But the face value on them right now, among 673 listings, lowest $16. There's a whole bunch of $16 seats on this one site I'm on right now, which they don't pay us, so I'm not going to shout them out, but they will be near the top of your Google recommendations if you just search Nebraska Northwestern tickets.
So I like Ken's Faith, the best steak in Omaha. I've been to a place that rhymes with hop, house, with our dear friend Garth Glissman. That is pretty good. Committee in Blackstone is incredible. That is really good. And there's another spot I went with my buddy Nader Dickerson. We're going to do a shot. The Drover in Omaha is legend. It is legend. And they got the old school salad bar where you can walk up there and just drench your salad with bacon bits.
See, I'm cheap. I don't even like going to steakhouses all the time.
Well, I'll say this.
Well, it's not that I'm cheap. It's just I feel like for the price, I can make a better steak at home.
I can go buy a $15 steak at said spot, throw it on my grill, and I'm going to be as pleased or more so than what I'll order for $75.
Yeah, and the key at home, you got to make yourself a nice compound garlic herb butter.
See, I need you to teach me that because all I do is season it, and I don't have any butter, and I don't sear. I just grill.
See, we need to have a steak off sometime. You and me, we'll get Dolman or some other people just involved, and they can be the testers, and we'll each bring 2 or 3 steaks to the party, and we can everyone try it. And
I love them, but why? I'll make you a steak, you make me a steak.
That'll work. We'll go 50-50 on it. We'll compare.
Yes.
I can do that because I've been working on my at-home pan-seared. Ooh, it's turning good. I got a whiskey butter I've been playing around with.
Jared, quit putting the cart before the horse about worrying about the Big Ten West. Just go 1-0. Totally agree. Sirles on the way next.
The voice of Husker Nation is on the air. This is Hail Varsity Radio. Insight, opinion, expertise, along with the biggest names talking Nebraska sports. Join in with the show at 402-489-1240 or 1-800-825-5865. Now, here are your hosts, Chris Schmidt and Elijah Herbel.
Back into it at Hail Varsity Radio. We say hi to Jeremiah Sirles, favorite Husker and NFLer at Sirles71_HSKR. Sirles, you are back from Champaign and some NFL travels, brother. How you doing?
I'm good, yeah. Super fun to go call the game for the color commentating there for Champaign, get a win. That's my first road win with the network since ever. And then a chance to go out to Cincinnati and watch the Bengals beat up on the Seahawks, see my client, take him out to dinner. And, yeah, man, things have been good. I'm waiting for this damn farmer to cut the corn out of my field so I can go hunt some deer and all that fun stuff.
You will go get Bambi, or you'll try anyway.
I'll do my best.
You were able to see Nebraska get a win, and I want to go back to Friday night, and your eyes say what about this football team beyond the goal line stand, beyond the fumbles? What have you noticed about them under Rhule?
The biggest thing is just how hard they play. You know, that's one thing for me. The defense specifically, they're playing with their hair on fire, and they responded really well to getting punched in the face against Michigan. You know, I think a lot of teams after the whooping that they took at home against Michigan could have went in the tank, and the way they responded and went out and fought and found a way to win a game instead of, for so many years, how many times we sat on the show and, man, the Huskers found a way to lose. Right, and it wasn't pretty. It wasn't how you wanted it to look, but they went out and played hard, and they found a way to put a game away in the fourth quarter on the road, and that, for me, is a huge sign of steps in the right direction of this program.
It's Jeremiah Sirles with us here on Hail Varsity Radio, and Sirles, we've seen a couple of pregame speeches now from Matt Rhule. We talked about the Illinois pregame speech yesterday here on this show, and a consistent theme in those pregame speeches has been going out on the football field ready to die. And it's kind of a two-part question here. First, if you're in that locker room, how do you respond to a speech like that? Is there something to hearing a speech like that pregame and actually, you know what, I'm going to go lay it on the line? And two, have you seen a team that's gone out on that field and played like they're ready to die?
It's hard for me because I have to put myself back in 19, 20-year-old Jeremiah's skin and hear that speech instead of the 28, 29-year-old NFL player that if an NFL coach said that to us, we'd be like, shut up, stop, no. But, I think as a young player, instilling that type of mentality in your program of there is nothing else, right? And I think it's one thing to go out there and be like, hey, we die, like the old Kyle Drogo or whatever his name was. But the idea of there's nothing else like this. And there's not. There's nothing else in the world like going out there and playing college football. Even the NFL, it's not the same. And to have the embodiment of the idea of what else would you rather be doing? I'd rather be dead than doing this, than not doing this. So let's go out and do it and lay everything I have for these 60 minutes, because you never know when it's your last time and you never know when you're going to do this again. And for a lot of you, this is one of 12 last opportunities to go out and play college football. That's more the message that I get when I sit there and I listen to that, instead of the physical die, right? But it's more along the lines of just there's nothing that's going to ever compare to this in life again with the competitiveness. So lay everything you have out there to where if tomorrow you died, you'd be happy with the fact of what you put out on that field.
Jeremiah Sirles with us. Sirles, how big was motivation for you, being motivated? How much button pushing did you need? Did your teammates need?
Everyone's different. I think everyone's different as far as there's guys that need a lot of that kind of cattle prod of get going and moving. And then there's other guys that actually backfires on. There's some guys that are so internally motivated and have their own things that if you start trying to rile them up, it actually makes them play worse, because then they start playing and letting emotion control them instead of controlling their emotion. And so for me, I was never a big rah-rah guy. I'd like to get going and I'd show some emotion, but I always knew that if I started letting my emotions run roughshod over me, I played out of control, I'd not stay in my technique, I'd start lunging, I'd start reaching and not trusting what I was doing from a technical standpoint. And, I think it's a lot easier for a defensive player to get rah-rah and go and build off it, because they're just blind dogs in the meat house, man. Just see ball, sick ball, run around, do whatever you want. But as an offensive guy, you got to stay controlled. You got to stay in the moment. You have to stay focused. And, so I think a lot more is why you see a lot more of the defensive guys hooting and hollering and running around, because they can just let their emotions go crazy.
Sirles, how did you personally keep your emotions in check? And I guess as a follow-up to that as well, how do coaches keep emotions in check, knowing how each of your players operate? Because I'm sure that's something a coach at some point in time has noticed. Hey, you know what? Sirles doesn't play as well whenever he's getting emotional on the football field. How does those two work in tandem? A player keeping their own emotions in check and knowing that about themselves, and then B, a coach knowing how their player best operates?
Yeah, first of all, you have to be self-aware, and you have to be willing, if someone approaches you and says something like that, not to fly off the handle and let your emotions rule yourself, right? It's a pretty tall-tale sign if someone comes up to you and they're like, hey, man, your emotions get going and, you kind of play out of control and you're like, the hell they do, right? You start freaking out. But, for me, it was in high school. I learned it in high school where, I had a coach, Coach Thanell, that he told me, I got a personal foul, a penalty. And it was a BS call, and I was super upset, and I started just playing mad and angry and trying to hurt everyone and fight. And, I played poorly. Right, between the whistles. I played poorly between the whistles. And he was really the first one that kind of approached me and was like, hey, you have to find a way to channel that in a better light. And then you get to the college level and you have to do it the same way, but now you have to do it on a practice field because you're trying to earn reps. Then you get to the NFL and you have to do it even different because you can't fight. You can't hurt people in practice. There has to be that controlled rage. And if you let your technique spill at all, then it doesn't work. So a lot of it is your teammates and understanding your teammates and being able to have the confidence to go to them and know that they'll be receptive of what you say and having that trust in them. And then also just through reps, right? Just reps of understanding when do I let my emotion go and push myself to the brink, and when do I really need to dial it back because it's starting to get out of control.
Along those same lines, Sirles, Ben Scott has gotten a couple personal foul calls this year, both pretty much the same reason, blocking a guy too long after the whistle. And I want to get your thoughts. You were there in Champaign, you saw it, and I think you saw it on TV as well for that Northern Illinois game. What's your take on Ben Scott and the after the whistle fouls? Because on one hand, I see it as, man, that's a mentality this Husker offensive line has lacked, that mean streak, that nasty. But on the other hand, it's also hurting the football team, and it's a guy that might be letting his emotions get the best of him. What are you seeing there?
Yeah, I think you're right on. I think it's a little bit of both. I think it's a guy that wants to be physical and finish and set that tone, but you have to know the second it starts hurting the football team, it's not worth it, right? And Cam Jurgens had a little bit of this issue too, of you want to finish a dude in the dirt, but if you have him on his heels and that whistle blows and you want to take him the next 3 steps and it's not one step, you just have to be smart, right? Because it's never worth the cool pancake or the cool knockout block if that yellow flag comes out and a huge play now is 2nd and 25 because it's a 15-yard penalty, right? So I love the aggressiveness. I love the ability of what he does. He just needs to understand when to control his emotions, and there's a time and a place for that, and you just have to pick and choose.
Jeremiah Sirles with us, couple minutes, Hail Varsity Radio. I want to go back to getting you out of control. Who pissed you off most, either at Nebraska or in the NFL? Who took you to that edge of losing your emotional cool?
Yeah, I'll never say I didn't lose my emotional cool because there was plenty of times that I did. A guy in Buffalo, Shaq Lawson,
okay,
first round pick out of Clemson. Him and I got into it weekly, I would say. Because I was a guy that was an undrafted guy, felt that chip on my shoulder, and so I always went hard, right? Like I never felt like I was a guy that could take a play off because I was always afraid of getting cut. And guys that are starters when you're a practice squad player sometimes don't love that. And so him and I used to get into it on Friday practices, usually was the practice that we'd get into it on because he'd want to be chilling going through and I'd punch the soul out of him or I'd do something with like in between and then it'd escalate and I'd kind of lose my cool. And then at Nebraska, it was Jack freaking Ganglish.
Really?
That kid, because he was young. He was young when I was an older guy. And he practiced so hard, and he was such a meathead that, like, you know, he'd just be running into you time and time again. And you'd be like, bro, it is week 11. I can't walk. I don't feel my fingers. And he's just like, yeah. Like just geared foaming at the mouth, right? And it's why he turned into such a great player. And I have a lot of respect because he made me better throughout the week. But there was a few times that we all lost it on him. And the great part about our line was like, if one fought, we all fought, right? So if he got into it with me, it was Spencer and Cole and Soon and whoever. And if he got into it with Brent, we're all running over there stomping on him, like just doing whatever you got to do. But yeah, Ganglish was definitely that guy.
I love that. Sirles is with us here on Hail Varsity. Nebraska Northwestern, how you feeling about Saturday?
Yeah, you know, I feel pretty good about this. You know, I watched Northwestern. Obviously, I watched a ton of college tape, and this team is very Jekyll and Hyde, in my opinion. You don't know which team you're going to get. Is it the one that came out and punched and went toe-to-toe with Penn State for 2 quarters, or is it the one that almost found a way to lose to Howard? Right? You just don't know. Now, if this backup quarterback plays, I pray for him because I think Tony White is going to dial up everything and anything to come after him because when Howard got to him, he was throwing up 500 Christmas packages back to those back ends. So I feel good about where Nebraska's at. I think that coming out and naming Harburg the starter put some questions to bed, and we don't have to worry and focus on that, and we can focus strictly on football. And if we can come out and take care of the football, have a 0 turnover game, I do think Northwestern's going to give us a few, whether putting it on the ground or interceptions. I think Nebraska, this could be a springboard coming off the heels of Illinois into the back half of the season.
So there's going to be a lot of pressure on the offensive line in the final 6 games. That's Nebraska's identity. It's still running the football, and they've been getting better there, it feels like, as the year's gone on. I want to get your thoughts on the offensive line here and what the next step would be against Northwestern.
Yeah, first things, they got to clean up the pre-snap penalties. You know, the unforced errors, I call them. In a game, you're going to have a hold or you're going to have a chop block or things are going to happen throughout the course of the game that you get penalties, but the jumping off sides, the not knowing where to line up, or those type of things, the mental errors, those need to get cleaned up for sure. But I agree with you. I think the O-line has played better and better each week. I throw Michigan out of the window when I talk about these equations. You can't even really put them in for evaluation purposes. But I thought Bryce Benhart has been playing very well. I think he's come a long way. You know, Ben Scott's been a super nice addition. Piper's been flashy. Turner obviously is, in my opinion, the guy that needs to pick it up at the left tackle position, but that is an extremely hard position to play. I'm not going to say it is because I played it. It's very difficult. But overall, if we can continue to run the football like we did early on in Illinois and create lanes, I like where this offensive line is going. I hope over the bye week they were able to find what identity they want to really press into as they go into the back half of the year here.
Does it feel like 10 years since the Hail Mary?
Yes, it does. I mean, it feels, I keep getting all these like flashbacks, remembrance of like, man, the last time Nebraska played Northwestern, I look back and I'm like, gosh, if I could go back and tell you a few things right now, we'd make a lot more money. But, for me, it's crazy to look back and see those moments and remember the rivalry that this game is. And it's weird to say, but I mean, when I played in the Big Ten, we were, I think, 1-2 against them. But they always fought us so hard, and it was always down to the wire. I don't know. And I think a lot of it goes back to the fact, and I said this on the podcast I do on the network, Nebraska is better on paper than Northwestern. But Northwestern is used to that being the case every single week. And they've still found ways to win every single year, right? And so if you overlook them at all, or you don't give them the respect that they're given, or you just kind of think we're better because we are, they know how to win football games using smarts and using their skill set, using the clock, all those things. They're extremely good at the intangible sides of off the field stuff, and I think that's why they're able to keep themselves in so many football games.
Is Northwestern a wild animal that's been backed into a corner, Sirles?
A little bit, based off of, and I don't think it's because of win-loss. I think a lot of it's because of the Fitzgerald stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a team that loved their coach and loved and fought for them, and to have him kind of taken out of there and the process in which that went, I think it galvanized that team a little bit. They've already won more games than they did last year, and I think they're a worse football team than they were last year, in my opinion. But, I think that was kind of the linchpin that they needed to really pull themselves together, and they're playing for each other. They're playing for that interim head coach, and they're just, at times, playing decent football.
Did you guys overlook them?
I don't think we overlooked them. I just think that they always came out and played their best football against us. Right? I mean, they were always, Kane Coulter all of a sudden took the entire college football by storm that first game when he beat us in 2011, right? And then we go up there and we fall behind because of some turnovers, and we have to fight our way and claw our way back into that game. And then obviously a Hail Mary there at the end. They just always seem to have a really good game plan on how they wanted to stop us and what they wanted to do. And I don't think we ever overlooked them, but they just always seem to play really well against us.
Sirles, last thought. Let's talk Harburg. His future, the rest of this season, is that viable to run him as much? And do you see his ceiling being reachable as a passer?
Yeah, he's still young, developing as a passer. I think anytime you're going to have a heavy running quarterback, he's going to get hurt eventually. It's not realistic to think he's not. But I will say this, I gained a lot of respect. I have a lot of respect, but I gained even more for Coach Rhule coming out and announcing him as the starter, because it sends a message to the entire team that I don't care if I bring someone in like I brought Jeff Sims in. If I have a guy that's winning games and I think he gives our team the best chance to win, he's going to play. And that's a message that resonates from every position group down. Everyone from a senior to a freshman, everyone in that program now knows that there is no the guy that, that's Coach Rhule's guy, or that's his golden boy, or whatever it is. Rhule's about winning football games only, and he made that very clear, naming Harburg the starter, and I'm excited for what that young man can go do.
Jeremiah Sirles with us here, Hail Varsity Radio at Sirles71_HSKR. Sirles, we'll talk again, bud. Thank you.
Absolutely appreciate you guys. Go Big Red.
Good stuff from Sirles. We'll spend some time with Evan Bland and a Jock Doc still to come. Special guest to announce for tomorrow. How about John Baylor to talk volleyball?
And now, back to Hail Varsity Radio.
Back with you, it's Hail Varsity. We say hi to Evan Bland, Omaha World Herald, at Evan Bland OWH. We thank Evan for a little audible here. Talk some ball with him. So, Evan, desperation level for Northwestern. Do you see Nebraska as a desperate team? Let's start there. Dion was asking in the inbox here, so I'll forward it to you. A little option pitch.
I don't know if I'd call them desperate. I mean, it's certainly a game that you want to win if you're looking at that bowl game and continuing to build on the momentum that you've had. But like, I don't get that sense. Like, I feel like one of the themes from players and coaches this week was like, you do whatever it takes to win. Like Thomas Fidone, a former number one national prospect at tight end, kind of almost half jokingly was like, yeah, if they need me to play defense, I'll do that. You know, Billy Kemp, who comes in with almost 200 career catches as a college football player, is like, yeah, you know, if I have to block and that springs the running back, like that's going to be the thing that gets it done. So it doesn't feel like this is a team where guys are caught up in roles or in playing time. They just want to kind of find a way to get it done. And that's what happened at Illinois. I think that felt pretty good to those guys. The staff, the coaching staff is continuing, especially on the offensive side, to figure out what the personnel does best, and they're building. So like, no, certainly it would be a disappointment if Nebraska didn't win this game. I think they have more talent than Northwestern. You know, I think they're building for more of a long-term goal than what Northwestern is, certainly with an interim coach and everything that's gone on that side. And you know, I do think it'll be a competitive game. This series tends to be unpredictable for the most part and close down to the end. So certainly it's a game that's important for Nebraska to win. It would make you know, the West race and bowl discussions a lot more interesting if they pull it out. But no, I don't think desperate is the word I would use. I think focused and determined would probably be closer to it. So focused, determined, ready to die? Hey, if they die, they die, right?
Well, you know, Nebraska fans, they'd be all good with that number being covered and controlled from quarter 1 through quarter 4. I don't know that Northwestern's going to play along, Evan, but how would you handle a Nebraska game where they're up 17 or more from the get-go, from the jump like 2 years ago?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I do think from just a talent perspective, it's a lot easier for Nebraska to attract skill position players in particular more than Northwestern does. And we saw things go off the rails in that one a couple years ago, and they looked like the superior team, you know, in a lot of the ways. And so I suppose that's possible. We haven't seen that a lot. Northwestern has struggled to stop the run. They had a good, you know, quarter or half against Minnesota when they came back from down 3 scores. So they've done a little bit of that. I think the thing about Northwestern that gives me a little pause for this being a potential blowout is they're playing like the team that they are, and that's a team that has nothing to lose. Again, this is an interim coach. You go back and watch some of the games that they've played. I think they've coached like they've had nothing to lose. I think, you know, again, if you would have said at the midway point that Northwestern was 3-3, I think that's probably better than what most folks would have prognosticated ahead of time. Certainly, I don't know anybody that picked them to beat Minnesota, so I think that gets your attention right there. But, you know, from the Nebraska side of things, the thing that I think is fascinating with this game in particular is how do they handle success? And this is really the first time that they've had that. They've had 2 weeks to feel pretty good about how things transpired in Illinois, some of the growth that they've had within the program. And Matt Rhule said it this week, right? Like, coming out of some of those losses, he felt like someone was standing on his chest. Out of this week, the challenge was to not walk around being happy and content. So how they handle this, I think, will be really telling about the growth of this program, because when you're a program that hasn't won 3 games in a row since 2016, I think that's pretty good evidence that they just haven't been able to build momentum and stack wins over the years.
So then, Evan, what is your barometer for Saturday in terms of Nebraska not playing complacent, not playing, you know, like they've already made it? What are you going to be watching for in that game against a Northwestern team that, I mean, let's face it, Northwestern is not a group of world beaters this year, but neither is Nebraska. So what is your barometer for Saturday in terms of progress and in terms of success for Nebraska not being complacent and still being motivated to go out there and get better every single week?
Well, I think it starts with the defense and continuing to play as they have with their hair on fire and really just bottling teams up, gang tackling, swarming to the ball, all that stuff. If they can add that next or unlock that next achievement of getting takeaways, then I think you're really cooking with gas and taking things to the next level. So I would start with the defense, but then offensively, just kind of sticking to what works. And I thought it was interesting this week hearing from Marcus Satterfield, the OC, saying, if he had his way, he'd be taking downfield shots quite often and passing it more than they are. But that's just not where this team is from a personnel standpoint, from a skill set standpoint. So I think if Nebraska's locked in, they're going to stay disciplined to the run game. They're going to lean on a veteran offensive line. They're going to rely on Anthony Grant, potentially Joshua Fleeks, Emmett Johnson, whomever, to get those tough yards on the ground. Heinrich Harburg as well. And then you just sort of pick your spots with what you do through the passing game. Maybe you get creative and find ways to get Billy Kemp the ball in space. But I just think, a sign of complacency in a moment like that is, we're gonna see what Harburg can do through the air, and we're gonna throw it 35 times. I don't think that's probably the best path to victory. So if you're really locked in on what it takes to win, I think this is a week where you embrace doing that ugly, maybe in a way that's not the most satisfying as a coach or the most aesthetically pleasing as a fan, but just kind of knowing that if you stick to that formula, chances are pretty good you're going to walk out with a W.
Evan Bland with us from the Omaha World Herald. Find him on Twitter at Evan Bland, OWH. Evan, what's a good day catch-wise and yardage-wise for these freshman wideouts that are being forced into duty?
Well, Malachi Coleman has a 5-yard out catch as the only one in his career to this point. So, building on that, I think would be a start. Jalen Lloyd, we haven't seen, a ton out of him either. Matt Rhule was a little bit hesitant on Jaden Doss as he's worked his way back from injury. He's probably a little bit behind those other two receivers that you're talking about. I think, part of the profile of both Lloyd and Coleman out of high school was that they were burners and they could take the top off on defense or on defenses. And, Coleman in particular was a national level sprinter who's still, I believe, looking to do track in the spring. Lloyd kind of in the same conversation. So maybe they do bring a little bit of a different dimension. And even if that dimension is go deep and take a couple defenders with you, then maybe that is the different look that sort of opens things up a little bit for the run game. So I think you will see the Nebraska offense adjust to those skill sets that they're going to have on the outside that's maybe a little bit different from, an IGC or a Marcus Washington or whomever. And again, maybe that'll shake some things up a little bit, loosen some things for what the offense wants to do through the run game. But, I think just letting those guys go out and play and just kind of realizing, you're good players, you've done it in practice, now let that translate into the game.
Evan, what's the story with Northwestern quarterback-wise? I know Coach White talked about 3 options. The Cincinnati transfers looked good. Is their backup a dual threat but not much of a passer, more of a runner guy? What's Nebraska facing at quarterback potentially Saturday?
Yeah, I thought Tony White laid it out pretty well yesterday chatting with reporters. It looks like their preferred starter, Ben Bryant's going to be more of a game-time decision. They didn't want to commit to him being fully back after he took a blindside hit against Penn State a few weeks ago. So we'll see. If he's back, he's more their passing threat. Brendan Sullivan, their backup, is more of their mobile threat with his legs, maybe not quite the threat through the air as Bryant is. And so I think the challenge is just if you're Nebraska, be aware of who's out there. If it is Bryant, then you're probably going to adjust your defense a little bit more compared to if it's Sullivan or even their third guy who's really, I think, more of a wildcat sort of option who's been banged up himself. So you just have to be really disciplined about who's out there. And this defense, you think about the first 6 games, they've kind of seen it all. They've seen guys like Shedeur Sanders, who's been able to extend plays with his legs. You've seen guys like J.J. McCarthy with Michigan, who can do both, but has generally been a pocket guy. You've seen teams with, that have had injuries at quarterback and have had to be kind of creative. So I think the defense has already shown that it can handle a lot of different looks. It just needs to be disciplined about knowing who's out there.
Evan, quickly, I want to get your thoughts on the dual feature that Husker fans will get on Saturday with first Nebraska Northwestern at Memorial Stadium and then Nebraska Wisconsin down at Bob Devaney. I mean, what kind of day is this in Husker fandom, I guess, looking back, like in recent memory? It seems like a big one to be able to get that dual feature where, if you're at the Husker game against Northwestern, you can walk on down to Bob Devaney and catch that one too.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. And if people had their preference, I'm sure, this would be one of those rare weeks when you wish Nebraska did kick off at 11 so you could have a little bit of time in between to reset and get over there. I was kind of reflecting a little bit today, just having talked to some former volleyball players from the Volleyball Day in Nebraska stuff about how, even in the 80s, it was hard for Nebraska volleyball to get crowds, and they would have signs out in front of the NU Coliseum saying, show your ticket stub from the football game and you can get in for free. And now you see in today's environment where a standing room only ticket at the Devaney Center is going to be like $200 or more. This is going to do, I think, major ratings on television, especially when you look at some of the other college football games that this match is going up against on Saturday night. And so it's really cool. It's a rare instance, maybe the first instance on a football Saturday that Nebraska's playing where the football team in a lot of ways is the undercard to the main event later that night. So I think it says a lot about how far volleyball's come. It says a lot about just the height of where this volleyball program at Nebraska is right now. It does feel like it's at the top of its game. And yeah, I mean, what a cool deal to be able to come to Memorial Stadium, see a team that's on the rise against Northwestern, and then top it off with a 1-2 matchup that kind of feels like a Final Four preview right now.
Love it. Evan Bland, Omaha World Herald. Evan, we'll see you on Saturday. Thanks for a few minutes today, bud.
Thanks, guys.
And now, back to Hail Varsity Radio.
Good stuff from Evan Bland and Jeremiah Sirles. We welcome in Dr. Brandon Seifert, Nebraska Orthopedic Center, a Jock Doc Wednesday. And a lot of Bears fans in the area, Dr. Brandon. And they'll be figuring out just who to pull for at quarterback. You've got Justin Fields that's, he's got a slight chance to play versus the Raiders, but dealing with that dislocated thumb. Thanks for joining us. Is this something you see quite a bit on the gridiron, the dreaded thumb dislocation?
Yeah, great question, Chris. Fortunately, we actually don't see a lot of thumb dislocations. We do see a lot of, finger dislocations in general, but fortunately the thumb's pretty rare. The thumb in particular is a pretty well-protected joint in terms of the different ones that are there. You've got your MCP, your IP joints. There's a lot of joints in the thumb, and a lot of those are really well-protected, kind of very thick ligamentous / kind of capsular structures keep that in place. Plus, you think about kind of the mobility, the flexibility of the thumb. You can put your thumb in a lot of different positions and still have, pretty good function, motion, and it can, sustain a lot of trauma. If you think about some of your other fingers and kind of the directionality of the way the joints go, they're a little bit limited in some of those motions, so it's a little easier to have dislocations in the other fingers.
Yeah, and Dr. Brandon, you talk about dislocating other fingers. I'm going to come in here with the personal story. I dislocated one of the joints in my pinkie back my senior year of high school football, and to this day, that joint is a little bit stiff and my pinky stays a little bit crooked. But what you're saying here is that's less of a risk with the thumb?
Yeah, it tends to be a lot less of the risk. Definitely occurs, less of the time, which, as it relates to the thumb. We actually see more fractures in the thumb than we do on the dislocation side. There's a couple of specific kind of thumb fracture injuries that are out there. One in particular is called a gamekeeper's thumb, which essentially that thumb gets kind of bent to the inside, catching on somebody's jersey, or somebody kind of runs into it as you're having your hand stretched out. I wouldn't say it's an overly common injury, but definitely something I see more, especially in football players, than I do the dislocation piece.
What really happened, Elijah's going to play it up like it's an old football war injury. I would bet money that he's cheating at Texas Hold'em, and Robert De Niro stormed into his basement with a hammer. I'm kidding, of course.
I'm going to pull up the old pictures of me and my football pads with a dislocated pinkie.
You and Sirles both have the most screwed up hands. Dr. Brandon Seifert's with us, Nebraska Orthopedic Center at Jock Doc Wednesday. We're talking Justin Fields and his dislocated thumb. So grip is going to be key for him, whether or not he plays. I know he fell on it awkwardly as he was getting smoked in the pocket. Dr. Brandon, what pushes that decision to go ahead and have surgery versus let this thing heal?
Yeah, and so, anatomically, as we talk about this, kind of two main joints you see the dislocations in the thumb. One would be kind of the IP joint. The other one would be kind of at the base of the thumb called the CMC joint. And as that dislocates, you think about the amount of trauma or force it takes for that to pop out of place, slide out of place. In the process of doing so, you can tear through a lot of ligaments, the capsular structure. And so as you think about, okay, when do we need to do surgery on these versus can you just treat it by, one, putting it back in place and then treating it from a closed perspective and some rehab. The biggest thing really becomes kind of the ligamentous support. In particular, if you dislocate the thumb joint that's called your IP joint, if you dislocate that one, there's a large ligament complex that sits on the inside part of that thumb that gives you basically kind of that stability in terms of grip strength stability. And if you don't necessarily have that ligamentous support on that inside portion of the thumb, then as you go to grip something, that thumb just kind of folds to the outside and no longer kind of gives you that interior grip. So if that kind of ligamentous injury shows up, then that's kind of an automatic need to have that ligament surgically repaired to redevelop that kind of grip strength stability. Obviously, another part of this would be, what we call fracture dislocation. So it dislocates and you have a fracture on top of the dislocation, and that would be something where you have to entertain the thought of whether it be pins or a plate over the area. Outside of that, if you're treating this, from a closed perspective, I would say, the vast majority of these dislocations in the thumb are treated in a closed perspective, meaning you have to reduce it, put it back in place, and then you take it through a short course of immobilization, a rehab course, and then you get back playing your sport at some point down the road.
Dr. Brandon, you answered the question about how many of these are more off of the dislocation and fracture. How about re-injury? Say Fields is given thumbs up, and he's going to be out there against the Raiders. What's the likelihood that there's insult to injury here and it gets worse? Either you follow through and hit a helmet, maybe you're stepped on again, maybe your running back just says, hey, I'm gonna really make it rough on those handoffs. I mean, this is not an easy part of the body for the quarterback to keep and protect.
Yeah, absolutely. So, there's kind of that varying level of, injury spectrum that's there. So acutely with these, as you kind of go back the first, anywhere from kind of 3 to 6 weeks after injury, there's still that kind of increased kind of dislocation risk compared to the normal population since you just had it happen. And so obviously that'd be worst case scenario. You go back, you play, and then you have a bad hit happen or you fall awkward down it and result in a redislocation. Alternatively, pretty easy just to kind of retweak it. So you may not, knock it totally out of joint, but you can kind of restretch all those kind of healing ligaments that are there. And it's pretty easy to do that, especially, falling on it, more the contact piece. Just by trying to grip the football and those kind of things, not likely to, kind of re-injure it. However, now we're talking about, okay, it's sore. The stability's probably not totally back there yet. And so that grip strength's going to be different. As a thrower in particular for him. And then ultimately what happens here is as you move along this process, you start out kind of in an instability part of it. As life goes along and those ligaments really tend to tighten up and scar in, actually over time it becomes really stiff. So it becomes more of an issue of not recurrent instability, but rather a lot of stiffness in the thumb. And so you might lose a lot of that mobility. And so that would be kind of the big thing I worry about kind of long-term for these athletes is more kind of a stiffness and a lot of kind of thickening of that tissue that surrounds that joint.
Dr. Brandon Seifert's with us here. It's a Jock Doc Wednesday on Hail Varsity. And Dr. Brandon, go back to my own pinky. I remember whenever I was getting back to playing, they'd buddy tape my finger to give it a little bit more support. And I assume there's some thumb braces out there available for this kind of injury, but are those able to be used for a quarterback with how much grip they need to have on the football and the importance of their hands? Are there bracing options that he can play quarterback in?
Yeah, there's a variety of different braces that are out there. The vast majority of braces for a thumb are more kind of what we call like thumb spica braces, where it kind of holds that thumb in a fixed position. But there are some other options out there where you can do some kind of figure of 8 kind of taping around the thumb. There's even more kind of some flexible braces, if you will, that are out there, and they're reasonable. But obviously the most important thing here is you really do rely upon that flexibility, that range of motion of that joint is what you need in order to do, his job in particular in the field. And so trying to find that kind of balance in between those two of a little bit of stability, at least trying to maintain staying away from those really kind of hyper extended type positions would be what you're looking for, but yet also give you the ability to have a good grip strength to bring that thumb, kind of oppose that thumb down to your small finger. You still want the ability to do that.
You need to be able to have some mobility with it if you're under center or even taking a shotgun snap, and then to grip it differently to hand off versus step back and throw. Dr. Brandon Seifert's with us, Nebraska Orthopedic Center at Jock Doc Wednesday. Justin Fields, our topic, and his dislocated thumb. Dr. Brandon, we'll give you a holler next week. Thanks for a few minutes.
Okay, fellas, take care.
All right, good to spend time with Dr. Brandon. That pinky you showed me is vicious.
Yeah.
It is absolutely. There's 4 family members and then Elijah's pinky right there.
And now,
back to Hail Varsity Radio.
Schedule road trips for you as we hit the road tomorrow back at the Single Barrel, 9th and P inside the Graduate, 4 to 6. Roadshow to get your weekend kicked off early in the right way. The Single Barrel, 9th and P inside the Graduate. Come by, say what's up. We'll spend time, plenty of volleyball as we gear up for Nebraska, Wisconsin. Big Red taking on Northwestern tonight, but Brandon Vogel and John Baylor going to join us. Gary Barnett tomorrow as well. Danny Burke. Some Vegas thoughts from Danny for Thursday Night Football and beyond. Friday up in La Vista at the Hurrdat Sports Bar and Grill. So see us, our Omaha friends, in La Vista Friday 4 to 6. Back for your pregame with the weekend edition of Hail Varsity, noon to 2 in front of Nebraska Northwestern on Saturday. Then at the Downtown Rosie's Monday from 4 to 6, the 10th and P. So plenty of options to come by and say hi, come hang out, and we're excited about tomorrow and beyond. Big thanks to all the folks at Single Barrel, at Rosie's, and at Hurrdat for having us out. Can always download the show, take us with. The Hail Varsity YouTube channel is the video portion. Can watch anytime there. Can also rewatch on the Hail Varsity Radio Twitter feed at HVarsity Radio. Spotify, iTunes, Google Play. All 3 platforms can get the show. Download that. Big thanks. Jeremiah Sirles talked ball with us, along with Evan Bland. Dr. Brandon right there from Nebraska Orthopedic, and in hour 1, Mr. Mike Babcock. We love talking football with Babbers, so it was a good day today as always. We'll get to some of your emails, try and carry some of those over. The stream was on fire today in a great way. Appreciate that. So many folks chiming in with just how their anticipation is growing, and you need to put up a picture of your pinky. That crazy pinky, Elijah.
Should I get it up real quick?
Yeah, I mean, it looks like a crinkle fry.
It does. At the time, it was called a lightning bolt.
You have your thumb, you have your 3 fingers, and then there's Elijah's pinky. It looks like someone took a tack hammer to it.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Between you and Sirles, because Sirles looks like he's given the old Spock sign with one of his paws. It's not that I've never jammed or jacked a finger before, but yeah, you've got the straight up.
Well, I didn't even think it was bad.
You got the crinkle fry going.
Whenever it happened, I didn't even think it was bad because it just felt like I jammed it, and then I looked down at my hand, and it looked wrong.
You can't even do the Dr. Evil with that pinky.
I'm efforting. I'm going to have it up on the screen.
Yeah, I mean, you can't put the pinky to the side of your mouth and twist, Dr. Evil style.
But what is nice is it's got a permanent little bend to it, so it's really easy for me to carry in groceries.
What is nice is I can use it as a coat hanger.
Exactly. Things just sit in it very nicely. As I'll get this picture pulled up here before we go.
It is vicious. Who did that to you?
That was my own teammate, actually. We were just doing a blocking drill, and I landed on, my hand landed on the top of somebody's pads as we were, pulling down through, and it just kind of knocked it out of place.
Did you weep?
No, I did not, actually. You can see
look at that. Elijah's waving.
It's an old picture of me.
Well, pre-mustache, but...
You know, they popped it back in. I was back at practice. They made me sit out the rest of the day, but I was back the next day. Dislocated pinkies aren't as bad as they look.
Let's play whack-a-mole with Elijah's left hand.
It looks a lot worse than it actually felt. It didn't feel that bad.
All right, back tomorrow, 4 o'clock. See us at the Single Barrel, 9th and P, inside the Graduate Road Show tomorrow with Hail Varsity.